I remember the first night I walked into that house. There was this cold draft that hit me right away, but not in a natural way. It wasn't just a breeze. More like the house had its own air, its own way of breathing, like it was alive. Of course, I didn't think much of it at the time. Who does, right? It was 2017, just after I graduated. Emily and I were looking for a place. Cheap, a little beat up, but something we could call our own. We were young, you know? Fresh out of college, full of hope, and way too much pride to move back in with our parents. We found this place, a 2-story house on Elmwood Drive. It looked decent from the outside, like one of those places you don't really notice unless you're walking by. The rent was cheap. I thought we hit the jackpot. The landlord was friendly enough. He didn't even ask for a deposit. That should have been the first red flag. I remember the first few days feeling normal. We unpacked, set up the furniture, and spent a couple of hours just enjoying the novelty of having our own space. I'd been working at a coffee shop during the day, and Emily was a graphic designer, so we weren't exactly busy, but we were content. But then, things started happening. Little things at first, tiny enough that they could have been dismissed if you were willing to make excuses. Like the door, the back door. I remember locking it one night after we had gotten back from dinner. The next morning it was open, just slightly, like someone had nudged it open without making a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then, why hadn't the lock clicked? Emily didn't think much of it when I brought it up. "It's an old house, Alex. Old houses do weird things," she said, half laughing, not even looking up from her laptop. I let it go, but that feeling, the feeling of being watched, didn't go away. It settled in the corners of my mind, the way a song you can't get out of your head lingers, even when you try to ignore it. The next week, it happened again. The door, the same one. This time I could have sworn I locked it. I even checked it twice before bed. Emily was already asleep upstairs, and I just had this weird sense that someone was downstairs. I stayed up a little longer watching TV, trying to shake the feeling. I don't know if it was the shadows in the corner of my eye or something, but I couldn't get rid of it. When I finally went to bed, I noticed something. The faucet in the bathroom. It was running. Not all the way, but just enough to hear it dripping. I could have sworn I turned it off. But who knows? Maybe I was just too tired. I told Emily the next morning, but she just shrugged it off. "Maybe it's just the pipes, Alex. We haven't had time to check everything." It wasn't just the faucet or the door, though. It was the feeling. The house had this oppressive weight to it, like it was full of something I couldn't see but was constantly aware of. A presence. And it wasn't friendly. Then a few nights later, I heard something that I can't explain away. It was late, around 1:30 a.m. Emily was asleep, and I was in the office upstairs finishing up some work. I had the door shut, but there was this sound, a soft thud coming from downstairs, like footsteps on the hardwood. They were slow, deliberate, almost like someone was pacing, but we were the only ones there. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was a neighbor, or the house settling, right? But the more I tried to convince myself it was something else, the more I knew it wasn't. I grabbed my phone, texted Emily asking if she was up. No response. I called her. No answer. The footsteps. They kept going. Around the living room, then into the kitchen. It didn't make sense. I thought, maybe I was just hearing things. I tried to dismiss it. But then, just as I was about to go downstairs to check, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. From the top of the stairs, I saw a figure standing at the bottom. A man, not anyone I recognized. He was standing still, just staring up at me, but I couldn't make out his face. It was dark, but I could see the outline. His shoulders were broad, his posture rigid, and the worst part? He wasn't moving. He was just standing there. I don't know how long we stood there like that. It felt like forever. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I bolted back to the office and locked the door. My heart was racing. I felt like I was going to choke. The figure didn't move. I didn't hear him anymore. I tried texting Emily again. Nothing. She still didn't answer. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, everything was fine. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dust, nothing out of place. The officer just nodded, told me it was probably an intruder who had run off when I scared him. He didn't seem concerned, but I was. I didn't sleep that night. And when Emily came home the next day, she had this look on her face. She was pale, like something had drained the color from her skin. "I saw him," she said quietly. I just stared at her. Who? The man, the one you saw. He was in the window. I didn't know what to say. It felt like my whole world was spinning. How had she seen him? We were in the house, alone, just like I had been. I started to question my sanity. Maybe we both imagined it. Maybe we were both losing it. But things didn't stop. They got worse. The footsteps came more often in the middle of the night, during the day when no one else was around. I started to hear them even when I was the only one home. At one point, I went into the basement to grab some cleaning supplies, and I heard them there too. It sounded like someone was right behind me. The thing is, I never told Emily what I had found. I found an old letter in the attic, hidden in the back of a dusty box. It was from 1979, written by a woman named Lily to someone named Peter. The letter was cryptic, but the last line sent a chill down my spine. I don't know what's in this house, but it's not the same anymore. I never showed it to her. I don't think I could have. I didn't want to scare her, but I also didn't want her to think I was crazy. That night, I packed up what little we had left and left. We found a new place the next day. I don't think either of us slept that night. I've never gone back to Elmwood Drive. I don't even want to know who lives there now. Whatever was in that house, it's still there. And maybe it always will be. I'll never forget the first night in the house. At first, it felt like a dream. Amy and I had just signed the lease for our new place. Finally! A real house, not some cramped apartment in the middle of the city. We were both excited, of course, but there was this little part of me that couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to brush it off, but the moment we stepped inside, I couldn't ignore the air. It felt stale, heavy even, like something was pressing down on me. But that's just how old houses are, right? They have that smell. It's hard to explain, but you know it when you walk in. The house was on Willow Lane, and yeah, it had its quirks. The floorboards creaked with every step you took. The kitchen was a little too dark for my liking, and the staircase was, well, the stairs were a little too steep for comfort. But it was ours now, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally getting ahead in life. Amy didn't notice it at first. She was busy unpacking, arranging the living room, and being her usual optimistic self. She thought I was just being paranoid when I mentioned how strange the house felt. "You're just adjusting, Ben," she said, laughing as she hung up some pictures. "It's a house. It's supposed to feel a little weird. It'll pass." Maybe she was right. At first, the strange feelings were just small things, right? Like the sound of the floorboards creaking late at night when no one was walking around. I'd wake up sometimes, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle, faint noises coming from upstairs. But there was no one up there. No one except for the shadows. A few days in, it was the door. The back door, to be specific. The one leading into the yard. I remember locking it before we went to bed, checking it twice. But the next morning, it was open. Just a crack. And I don't know if you've ever had that moment where you just know something's wrong, but I could feel my stomach twist. I told myself it was probably the wind, or maybe I didn't lock it properly. Maybe I was just tired. But it happened again the next night. The same door. Open. Amy just shrugged it off, of course. She wasn't bothered by it. She even laughed when I told her, "You're being paranoid. It's just the house settling." It's an old house, Ben. I tried to tell myself the same thing. It's an old house. Old houses do weird things. But it wasn't just the door. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was like the house had eyes, like something was watching me. I'd be sitting in the living room, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a movement, just a flicker. I'd turn to look, but nothing would be there. I even started locking the doors at night, even though it didn't make sense to lock a house when there was no one around. Still, the noises kept happening. Soft thuds, footsteps, creaks. But every time I checked, there was nothing. Nothing at all. Just emptiness. And the chair. I didn't want to admit it, but it started with the chair. It was in the guest room. We hadn't really paid attention to that room at first, you know? The guest room. The one with the old furniture. It was there when we moved in, but I didn't think much of it. But one morning I walked past and noticed something. The chair in the corner had been moved. It wasn't much, just a few inches, but enough that it caught my eye. I went in to check, thinking maybe it was just a draft or something that nudged it. But when I reached out to push it back into place, my hand froze. The chair felt cold. I didn't know why, but I swear the room felt off, stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. There was no way the chair had moved by itself, not unless someone had... No. I couldn't let my mind go there. It was just an old house, right? But then I started noticing more things, small things like how the temperature seemed to fluctuate. One moment, the hallway would be warm, and the next, it felt like you were walking through ice. I'd go downstairs for a glass of water at night, and the air would feel thick, like it was holding its breath. And then there were the dreams, every night the same one. I was standing at the top of the stairs looking down into the living room, but it was empty, just silence. And in the corner, I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still. I couldn't see his face. It was always too dark, but I could feel him watching me. Every time, when I tried to move, my legs wouldn't respond. I couldn't scream. It felt like someone had paralyzed me. And every time I woke up, I was out of breath, heart pounding. I couldn't tell Amy. She didn't believe in this stuff. She'd just tell me to stop overthinking it, and maybe I was. But one night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't ignore. I heard footsteps, slow, heavy. They were coming from upstairs. No one was there, but they were getting closer. I waited for what felt like forever, lying still, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. The footsteps kept coming. And then, bang! I heard something crash. I grabbed my phone and texted Amy, asking her to wake up, but she didn't respond. I waited. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I couldn't breathe. I knew I had to go check it out, but every time I moved, the footsteps seemed to follow me. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and made my way upstairs. The second I reached the top of the stairs, everything stopped. No more footsteps, no more sound. But then I saw it, the guest room door. It was open, just a crack, and I knew it hadn't been like that before. I had closed it. I swear I had closed it. I walked toward it, my legs trembling. And as I opened the door, I froze. The chair was in the middle of the room again. But this time, it wasn't just in the middle of the room. It was facing the door. And the air, it felt like something was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I ran. I didn't even think about it. I just turned and ran out of the room, out of the house. I didn't stop until I was sitting in the car, out in the street, trembling. Amy eventually came out looking confused. She didn't know what to say. That was the last night I spent in that house. We moved out the next morning, and I haven't looked back since. I don't know what was in that house, but I don't ever want to find out. To this day, every time I drive past Willow Lane, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me from the window. It's like I can still feel it, the eyes, the heavy air, the chair. Maybe it's still waiting for me to come back. I never thought a new house could make me feel so unsettled. The kind of unsettled that creeps under your skin, stays with you even after you leave the house. That's what happened to me when we moved into this old two-story place on the edge of town. I should have known better. You know how people always say, you just get a feeling when something's wrong? Well, I didn't listen. Maybe I should have. Let me backtrack a bit. My wife Lauren and I had been hunting for a house for months. You know how that is. Never finding anything that feels right, or if it does, it's way over budget or something's wrong with the place. We finally found it. A little older than we wanted, but it was charming in a way, and the price was right. I wasn't thrilled about some of the quirks, but honestly, after months of looking, we were both exhausted. It was the one. The first day we moved in, it was all excitement. New beginnings, right? There's a certain thrill to unpacking boxes, hanging pictures, setting up a new life. Lauren was so excited. She had always dreamed of a house like this. A big two-story with a decent yard for our dog, Max. I remember that afternoon when we were sitting on the back porch with a glass of wine, just breathing it all in, feeling like we'd finally made it. But then there was the room. It wasn't anything special at first glance. It was an extra bedroom upstairs, one we didn't need, but I guess the previous owners used it for storage. The door was shut, locked, with a small, old-fashioned keyhole. Not the kind you see in most houses today. It was just odd. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they'd left stuff behind. But when I went to open the door to see what was inside, I noticed the key was missing. There was no handle either, just the lock. Lauren didn't care much about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was important somehow. It wasn't just a locked door, it was a door that didn't make sense. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling, when something small in your house just feels off. Maybe it's a light that flickers every time you walk past it. Maybe it's a weird sound you can't explain. For me, it was that door. I asked the realtor about it the next time we saw him, but he brushed it off. "Old house quirks," he said, laughing. "Probably nothing more than junk behind it. I didn't buy it. But what could I do?" We were settling in, and I had bigger things to worry about. Unpacking, getting settled into the neighborhood, the whole routine of making a new house feel like home. I decided I would get around to it later. The first night we slept in the house was the worst. We were exhausted, and honestly, I didn't expect anything strange. But that night, I woke up to the sound of something, moving upstairs. I froze. The house was old, yeah, and there were always creaks and groans, but this was different. It was like footsteps, slow and steady, pacing across the floor. I heard it clearly. But Lauren was sound asleep next to me, and Max was curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring. I laid there, listening. The footsteps continued, dragging on for what felt like hours. Then they stopped. I thought I might have imagined it, but the dread in my chest wouldn't go away. I lay there for another hour before I dared to move, before I dared to get out of bed and check. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was because I wanted to prove to myself that nothing was wrong, that it was just the house settling, like everyone always says. But when I stood in that hallway and looked up at that locked door, I don't know. I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to open it. The next morning, Lauren didn't even remember me waking up, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Something wasn't right. The days went on and I tried to forget about it. But the footsteps came every night, sometimes at the same time, sometimes later, but always in the middle of the night. And then there was the tapping. Light, rhythmic taps, like nails against the floor or the wall. It didn't make sense. And every time it was always from upstairs, always near that room. Lauren still thought I was just stressed from the move. "Maybe you're hearing things," she suggested, her voice full of that calm concern I was starting to get used to. But I wasn't hearing things. I know what I was hearing. One afternoon, I decided to check out the attic. Maybe there was an animal up there, a squirrel or a raccoon, something causing all the noises. It made sense, right? I went up there and found nothing. Not a single thing out of place. Just boxes, old furniture covered in dust. I was so relieved. For a moment I thought maybe it really was just the house settling. But then, later that night, it happened again. The footsteps. But this time they weren't above me. They were coming from the hallway. Slow. Like someone walking just out of sight. My heart raced. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway, my feet almost sticking to the wooden floor. And when I passed the room with the locked door, I felt a chill run through me. Like someone was watching me. I tried the door again, hoping maybe the lock had just been old, but the door didn't budge. That was when I really started to panic. I decided to call a locksmith the next day, and when he came over to check it out, he couldn't open it either. He tried for a good hour, saying it was probably some kind of old mechanism, but the lock was jammed tight. But before he left, he said something that made the blood drain from my face. You know, the last family who lived here left real fast. Said they had a problem with noises. Can't blame them, really. This house is full of secrets. What the hell did that mean? We decided to take a break from the house for a couple of days. Lauren, me, and Max. I thought maybe time away would help clear my head. But when we returned, that room was different. The door was open, the lock had been removed, and what I found inside made me wish I hadn't opened it. The room wasn't just empty. There were pieces of furniture shoved to the side, old paintings lying face down on the floor, and papers scattered everywhere. and in the corner there was a small chest. It was covered in dust, but it didn't look like it had been moved in years. My hand was shaking as I opened it, but inside were old photos. Faded, black and white pictures of a family I didn't recognize standing in front of the house. But the thing that made my stomach churn? The pictures were all from different decades. The faces were all too familiar. People I'd seen in town, people who had lived here before, people who hadn't been around in years. Lauren didn't want to stay another night. I didn't blame her. I'd barely slept the last few nights, but now I could feel the weight of whatever was in that room pressing on me. There were things hidden in this house, things we weren't supposed to know. We moved out within a week. I don't know what happened in that house. I can't explain it. But every time I close my eyes, I still hear those footsteps. Sometimes I swear I feel them behind me. And the worst part? I'm sure the house is still standing there. Still waiting for the next people to move in, for the next family to open that door. You know, I never thought I'd end up being the type of person who tells horror stories. But I've been thinking a lot about what happened, what we went through, and maybe it's time to finally put it into words. Maybe I'm hoping that sharing it will help me make sense of it. Or maybe it's just to get it off my chest. Because ever since we left that house, I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, watching. I should probably start by telling you that I didn't believe in ghosts, or anything like that. Like most people, I thought it was all just stories, exaggerated, made-up things people use to spice up a conversation. I thought that's all it was. Until we moved into that house on Pinewood Avenue. I met Jen a few years ago. She was different from anyone I'd ever met. Full of life, always laughing, always up for adventure. We spent most of our time in a tiny apartment downtown, but we both knew it was time for a change. You know how it goes. When you've been living in a cramped space for too long, you start imagining something bigger, something more permanent. So when we found the house on Pinewood, it seemed like a dream. I remember the first time I saw it. The place was big, way bigger than anything we'd ever imagined affording. 4 bedrooms, a nice big backyard with a little deck, even a finished basement. It was old, sure, but that's what made it feel like it had character. We were sold. But looking back now, maybe there was something off about it. Something I couldn't see at first. Maybe it was the price. It was too good to be true. I remember the real estate agent saying, "It's been on the market for a while, but I'm sure it'll be perfect for you two." I don't know. Maybe I should have listened to that voice in the back of my head telling me to run. We moved in, and for the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. Jen was happy, I was happy. We unpacked, painted walls, and set up furniture. But then the noises started. It wasn't anything major at first, just creaks like the house was settling. But they came more often, every night. And it was always in the same place, above the stairs near the hallway. You could hear something heavy dragging across the floor, like furniture being moved. But it was just us, and no one else had a key. I'll admit, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was the house, old pipes, the wind, whatever. Jen wasn't so sure. She'd sit up at night, her eyes wide, listening to it. And I'd tell her the same thing every time. It's just the house settling, Jen. It's old. It's normal. But the more I said it, the less convincing I felt. It didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like just the house settling. One night, I decided I was going to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't take the sound anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went up to the attic. The door was ajar, which struck me as odd because I was sure I'd closed it earlier. I hesitated, but then I figured it was just dust or maybe some squirrels that had found their way in. The attic was a mess. Boxes everywhere, cobwebs in the corners, but nothing looked unusual. Still, that dragging sound, it was louder now. It was coming from the corner of the attic, beneath the floorboards. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought I'd find some hidden compartment or a rat or something, but what I found didn't make sense. I knelt down by the corner where the sound seemed to be coming from, shining the flashlight along the floor. There was a small, narrow crack in the floorboards, like something had been pushed or hidden beneath. I pulled at it, slowly at first, but then with more force. And that's when I found it. A small, rusty key. I don't know why, but the moment I saw that key, I felt my stomach drop. I knew it wasn't something I was supposed to find. I slipped it into my pocket and left the attic without a word. That night, Jen and I stayed up late, again, listening to that scraping sound. It was more persistent now. It wasn't just some random noise anymore. It was deliberate. It was waiting for something. And I swear, I'm not crazy, I swear, I heard it call my name. It wasn't loud, not like someone shouting, but soft, a whisper almost. My name, Alex. I tried to shake it off, but Jen was visibly scared. She'd been on edge for days now, jumping at every little sound. That was when I decided we needed to figure out what was going on. We had to open that door. The key I found, it fit perfectly into a small door at the back of the attic, a door that had been hidden behind a pile of old, rotting furniture. When I opened it, it led to a narrow, dark hallway. It felt wrong the moment we stepped inside. It was like a part of the house had been sealed off from the rest, as if it was forgotten. Jen wanted to leave right then and there, but I couldn't. Something pulled me forward down that dark corridor toward a small, locked room. When I opened it, there was a journal, old, frayed, and filled with strange entries. The handwriting was messy, chaotic. It wasn't like anything I'd ever read before, but there was one thing I remember from it. They don't leave. They never leave. And then, right there in the margin, if you hear the scraping, it's too late. I remember looking at Jen, and she was pale, more pale than I'd ever seen her. And then, the scraping started again. But this time, it wasn't from the walls. It was coming from inside the house, inside the room, right behind us. We didn't stay. We couldn't. I don't even know how we managed to get out. But I know this much. When we left that night, the house felt different, like it had known we were leaving. The door slammed shut behind us, and all the noises stopped. We never went back. I don't even know if the house is still there, but every now and then I can't help but think about that key, about that room. And sometimes when it's quiet, I'll hear something, faint but there, like dragging, scraping against the walls. I'll always wonder if it's still waiting, if it's still watching.